My name is Rachel Connors. I'm 28 years old, a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the stable one. That's what my family calls it: stable, responsible, reliable. But what they really mean is available. The one who never breaks down. The one who always says yes. I built my life from nothing. I worked through college without help. Climbed my way into a quiet but respectable career, and paid for everything I owned down to the last fork in my kitchen drawer. No shortcuts, no handouts, just me, showing up, again and again. And yet, somehow, I'm never the one who gets seen. Not really. In my family, attention belongs to the loudest crisis, and that crisis has always been my older sister, Erin. While she stumbled through life in a whirlwind of lost jobs and bad choices, I was the one called in to pick up the pieces. Not because I wanted to, but because I was expected to. They never asked. They just assumed. And like always, I nodded, smiled, and made it all work. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a daughter and more like a backup generator. Quiet, constant. Only noticed when everything else failed. I love my family. But love, when it's always taken and rarely returned, begins to feel more like obligation than connection. I didn't mind being stable. I just didn't want it to mean invisible. Erin has always had a gift, a twisted kind of charm that turns every mistake into a tragedy and every consequence into someone else's fault. She's 2 years older than me, but somehow always 5 steps behind. When she lost her job, it was because her boss was toxic. When she got kicked out of yet another apartment, it was because her roommates were jealous. When bills went unpaid, she was just doing her best. And my parents? They never questioned a word. They'd rearrange their lives. And when that wasn't enough, they'd turn to me. Because I was stable. Because I was lucky. Because, apparently, being responsible is a license for others to lean on you until you break. Erin never once looked around at the wreckage she left and thought, maybe this is mine to clean up. She just cried, and someone always swooped in. Usually me. I wanted to scream, when does it end? But no one listened. It was easier to make excuses for Erin than hold her accountable. Easier to paint her as the broken one and me as the cold one. But cold isn't refusing to enable chaos. Cold is pretending dysfunction is love. And I was done pretending. For years, I carried the weight of my family's choices without complaint, quietly, consistently, like it was my duty. I co-signed loans, paid bills I didn't create, and made sacrifices no one even noticed. At 21, I let Erin use my credit to get a car. She defaulted within months, and my score took the hit. At 23, I wired $2,000 to help my parents with the mortgage after Dad was laid off and Erin moved back in. At 25, I paid for a lawyer when Erin got a DUI. My reward was silence. No apology, no gratitude. Just more expectations. Every act of help wasn't seen as generosity, it was seen as obligation. When I hesitated, even once, I was labeled selfish. When I refused, I was called cold. There were no thank yous, only reminders: you're the strong one, or worse, you're lucky you can help. But strength has limits, luck runs out. And I began to feel hollow. Like a resource instead of a person. My time, my money, my energy, none of it felt like mine anymore. I was drowning in quiet sacrifices, buried under everyone else's emergencies. While no one ever asked what I needed. They just assumed I'd always say yes. There comes a time, especially as we get older, when we realize that peace is more valuable than approval. For me, that moment came quietly, not in anger but in exhaustion. I had spent years being dependable, being the one who showed up, paid up, and patched things together. But I began to notice something. My life didn't feel like my own. Every paycheck was half spoken for, every phone call came with a hidden ask. I couldn't relax in my own home, it was a space waiting to be invaded. So, I did something no one expected, I left. I sold the condo I'd worked so hard for, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I moved to a small rental across town, nothing fancy, just quiet. No one asked where I was going, and I didn't offer. In a world that praises selflessness, especially for daughters and caregivers, we're rarely taught when it's okay to step away. But I stepped anyway. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally started caring about myself. Sometimes, especially in American families, being the strong one just means you're the one taken for granted the longest. And I was ready to end that chapter. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had a rhythm, same casserole, same forced smiles. Same silent expectations passed around like side dishes. That night, I sensed something was off. My mother's smile was too wide, my father's silence too deliberate, and Aaron, already at the table, wouldn't meet my eyes. I knew the pattern well, they were about to drop something on me, something big, and they were hoping I'd absorb it without a fight. We got through salad and small talk before my mother folded her hands and said it, soft, rehearsed, like she was offering good news, Aaron's moving in with you for a little while. No questions. No discussion. Just a quiet decision made without me, wrapped in politeness and guilt. My father looked away, bracing for resistance. Aaron smirked, assuming victory. But I didn't argue. I smiled, nodded, and said, of course, if it helps Aaron, I don't see why not. They mistook my calm for compliance. They didn't notice how still I became afterward. Because what they didn't know, what no one thought to ask, was that the apartment they were so eager to take over hadn't been mine in weeks. And I had no intention of ever making space for them again. The messages started pouring in by Monday. We'll bring Aaron's mattress Saturday. Frank's loading the boxes Friday night. She's so excited to have her own space. Every sentence carried the same assumption, I would open the door and absorb them, just like always. But this time, I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because they were speaking to a version of me that no longer existed. Saturday came. I left early, took a quiet drive across town, wandered through a farmer's market without buying a thing. By the time the fourth call buzzed in my pocket, I already knew what had happened. My mother's voice, usually soft, was brittle with confusion and panic. There's someone here, some man. He says he lives in your condo. Rachel, what's going on? I let the silence stretch before answering. I sold it. Weeks ago. Her shock was real, raw even, but it didn't move me. For once. They had planned their invasion and arrived at a castle that no longer stood. You said she could move in, my father snapped. I did, I replied calmly, but I never said where. That pause that followed wasn't just confusion, it was the sound of a system breaking, quietly, permanently. By evening, they were at my door, Carol, Frank, Aaron, and a trunk full of boxes parked at the curb like it was moving day. I wasn't surprised, I'd always known they'd come. My mother looked tired, her lipstick faded. Aaron stood with her arms crossed, eyes burning. You said she could move in, my father snapped, frustration rising. I didn't flinch. I said, if it helps Aaron, I don't see why not. That was at the old place. Silence. They had nothing to say because deep down, they knew, they never asked, they just assumed. When I refused to let them in, they threatened, guilt, pushed. But this time, I stood firm. And when they wouldn't leave, I did what I never imagined I'd do, I called the police. Not to punish, but to protect my peace. My mother's voice cracked. You're calling the cops on your own family? Yes, I was. Because for the first time, I chose myself. If you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, if you've ever felt like the only way to be free was to say no, you're not alone. Subscribe for more stories like this. Sometimes, closing the door isn't cold, it's the beginning of healing. The next morning, I woke up to missed calls, texts, and a storm of blame. My mother had posted on Facebook 3 paragraphs of heartbreak emojis and a photo of Erin as a toddler, painting me as the villain who abandoned her family. Comments poured in. People I hadn't spoken to in years calling me cold, selfish, ungrateful. But this time, I didn't shrink. I posted back screenshots of the money I sent, the car I co-signed, the lawyer I paid for. The messages I kept. Not to seek pity, but to tell the truth. And then, I turned off my phone. Not out of fear, but out of peace. That night, the apartment was quiet, no demands, no guilt. Just the hum of the fridge and the soft click of the lights going off one by one. I sat with a cup of tea, not to calm down, but to honor the stillness I had finally earned. Somewhere out there, they're rewriting the story again, casting me as the heartless one. Let them. Because I know my truth. I didn't walk away from my family, I walked away from being used. If this story touched something in you, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss what comes next. These aren't just stories, they're reminders. That healing takes strength, boundaries are not betrayal, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is finally say enough.